because we did something of a positive, nonviolent nature, it will have its impact on on the infrastructure of human life, whether we see it or not. And so we ought to have, on the one hand, a lot of confidence, and on the other hand, a lot of discernment to always see what is the positive, constructive action that I can undertake here.
Welcome, my friends. Thank you for joining me. I am very honored to present to you a professor, Michael Nagler. He is the president and founder of the Metta Center, the Center for Nonviolent Studies. And I'm very happy to be wading through his pile of books that are life-changing. And I'm just very happy to have the chance to ask him some questions and spread the good word a little bit. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for having me, and I really look forward to our conversation and sharing it with your friends.
Oh, thank you very much.
Mhm.
I'm very curious always to start with within the peace movement. I know a lot of activists tend to be people who are in the thick of it. And sometimes when you're in the thick of things, it's difficult to get a larger view of the progress of a movement. And sometimes
Yeah,
that can feel disheartening.
yeah.
And so I'm curious about what you are currently finding hope from and
Mm.
enthused about as you watch the progress.
Well, it's clear to see two different kinds of progress, of positive development that have gone on over the last, about 20 years, roughly speaking. One of them is the much greater amount of nonviolent action around the world, and people are really becoming aware of it. When there's an oppressive regime or an injustice of some kind, people are now more likely to know that there is such a thing as nonviolence that they can use. Secondly, the way we use nonviolence is becoming more sophisticated. I used to say back in the old days that bank robbers do more, uh, looking over their strengths and weaknesses and debriefing and stuff like that, than peace activists do. And that was partly correct because we were entirely in a reactive mode. There would be an atrocity, we would react. And Gandhi famously developed what he called constructive program, which enables us to be proactive and create institutions that will be part of a nonviolent future, including even in some cases, decision-making institutions, which is often seen as a threat to government. But having said all of that good stuff, John, I'm sorry to say that there's also been quite a pronounced trend over that same period of time that nonviolent movements have been less effective. And we think the reason for that is that regimes are becoming more aware of it. For example, in the late 1980s, the Israeli government expelled uh, Palestinian American, actually, Mubarak Awad, who had founded the Palestinian Center for Nonviolence in Ramallah. And at the very same time that they expelled Mubarak, there was a terrorist operating by the name of Sheikh Yassin, and they undoubtedly knew where he was, and they were already operating with impunity, but they didn't move against him. They moved against Mubarak,
Oh,
who was nonviolent.
right. Oh my gosh.
So, it shows that regime members are becoming aware of the power of nonviolence and being afraid of it. Hold on one second, Charlie.
A part of that research also shows that violent resistance is also
Declining.
that's not neither
Yeah.
are effective. Resistance is declining.
Yeah. Stephanie points out that in all fairness, we should add that violent resistance also is becoming less effective. So it's just
That's a good point. Yeah, so there's a kind of a paradigm shift that's happening as much as
yeah, I think that's right. It's something we need to understand better, I think, and prepare for. I mean, particularly at this point in time where there's a pronounced anti-authoritarian drift, widespread in the world, and certainly very dramatically pronounced in the United States. I think we need to go into a mode of non-confrontational actions and build strength, which often means understanding, training, education, and then be ready to resist when we are ready to do it effectively. And that's a hard thing to say because the blitzkrieg, as it's been called, of uh, destructive moves by the administration is so painful and so costly that you're every day it adds to the pain and the suffering, and we want to stop it now. And Joanna Macy used to say, first thing that you must do in any movement, stop the worst of the damage. But the tragic fact is, we're not capable of stopping it right now. But in the long run, it is possible to learn how to stop it and to stop it. And I'll tell you, if you don't mind my going on and on here, John.
That's why we have you here.
Okay. I have a kind of strange ambition at this point in time, which is actually new for me. I've been kind of groping my way towards it. That, if you look at the history of violence and nonviolence, it's a pendulum that goes back and forth and back and forth. And I want to stop that. I want to solve this problem in such a way that there's a deep systemic change and problems like it will not happen again.
And you have a sense of how to make steps toward that?
Well, I do have a sense, but it needs to be parlayed into actual, strategies and action. The great British historian Arnold Toynbee used to say, the only way to overcome apathy is through enthusiasm. And for enthusiasm, we need two things. We need an idea that takes the imagination by storm and a practicable plan for putting that idea into action. Now, I think we have the idea that takes the imagination by storm. It's called nonviolence. It's extremely inspiring, and the successes of early nonviolent movements have been very impressive, dramatic, and hopeful. But what we lack now is a strategy, a long-term strategy. We're going to do this, and when it succeeds, we'll move on to that. The end goal of this. So we need that, and we need, at this point in time, an awful lot of training so that people can carry out nonviolent actions in a very oppressive regime, which is what is happening.
I think that's very important.
Yeah, I guess I could mention that one other thing. Under the general category of greater sophistication in nonviolence, people are beginning to realize that training is necessary. I mean, for example, in the early 90s, there was something called the Balkan Peace Team because the split up in former Yugoslavia was happening. And these people who were so idealistic, good-hearted people, they thought they would just go there and stop it. And as a result, they caused more harm than good because the resistors had to protect them from the regime as well as protect their own people. So, but that was then. What's happening now is we have about 20 organizations that are carrying out what's called unarmed civilian peacekeeping. Well, actually, they just changed the name, which I'm unhappy about, to unarmed civilian protection. But I think the potential for it is much greater than just protecting a few civilians.
Right. Not just defending against something that's wrong, but actually nourishing peace.
Exactly. And these 20 organizations have entered areas of severe conflict as we speak. One of my very good friends in this movement is part of a group called Nonviolent Peace Force, which is probably the largest of the, what we call them, UCP organizations. And they're operating in the West Bank, and they are already asking for volunteers to get training and go into Gaza.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. And for people watching, I'll put links to all of these spaces down below so you
Right.
can
Thank you.
follow and figure out how you can help.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like this image that you have of creating a lasting, uh, growing tide of peacekeepers,
Yeah.
I feel like that's especially doable rather than the pendulum idea where people get worn out and they fall back,
Yeah.
because the one of the things that differentiates the process of peace is that it's built on something that's inherent to us, and
Yeah.
it's a quality of our nature. In Taoism, we use this term yang sheng. It nourishes life.
Uh-huh.
So by us invigorating ourselves from this place, by creating actions from this place, it's inherently nourishing.
Yeah.
It's an exhausting uphill struggle, but it's something that keeps us going. It fulfills us in a way that I think inherent conflict and people destroying their inner character through violence and such.
In
Yeah,
fact,
it has to short circuit.
yeah, we can be, there's a little more scientific information about that now. And in fact, I should have mentioned that a big improvement, a big resource that is developing outside of this movement process proper is in the world of science. There is a shift from the old, Freudian idea that, we're basically extremely nasty, violent, have to train to keep that under control. But as you just touched on, I think the most important fact to know about nonviolence is that it is our inner nature. And you can contrast very clearly this phenomenon called moral injury, which is causing uh, former military personnel to commit suicide. I think they're now committing suicide at a faster rate than they're being killed in combat because of what they do to their own soul, what they do to their inner consciousness by carrying out violence against others. So the fact that this thing has a name, it may not seem too important on the surface, but it provides a space where scientists can explore this. And what we now need is to look at the positive side, where all I have at this point so far is a few anecdotes and quotations from nonviolent actors who say exactly what you were just referring to, that it's extremely nourishing. I mean, they start discovering who they are.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And this idea of activists burning out or becoming hopeless, maybe that's something that won't occur when we're working from the space that we feel is good for us
Yeah,
just by the virtue of doing it.
yeah. Or if it does occur, it will be people recognizing that they exhausted themselves and they need to refresh rather
That's
than
right.
saying this stuff doesn't work.
That's right. And that's part of the training you mentioned.
That would be part of the training and the education. Yeah. And we now have programs, post-secondary programs around the country, a pretty high number of them, which include peace studies.
Hmm.
some of which include nonviolence. So that's something that was not available when I was teaching at Berkeley.
Yeah, gosh. And for the people that perhaps haven't had the chance to hear about that, you taught at Berkeley, was it for 47 years? Did I hear?
That sounds about right. Yeah. I know, I know I don't look old enough, but
No, no, you're spring chicken for sure.
yeah,
But
I started in comparative literature and classics. I was teaching Homeric Greek primarily on the classic side. Very good study of violence, by the way. And then somewhere in the late 70s, I got together with some colleagues and we started a program. It wasn't a department, but a program called Peace and Conflict Studies. And I taught in that. I taught my year-long nonviolence course in that program for quite a while. Now, Stephanie and I have a radio program, and the mother station is down in Point Reyes Station. You may not be aware of the region up here, but it's a very pleasant, small town, very near the coast, very near a big park. And long story short, we went down to do our show last Friday, and I stepped out of the car, and somebody said, "Michael," and rushed over, gave me a big hug. And she was one of my students from the nonviolence class back
I
then.
love
So
from back all the way in the beginning.
all the way back, yeah. So they are out there.
Yeah. How wonderful. Well, and I recognize specifically, just for me, in my selfish sense, the chance to thank you because I grew up in Southern California and I had a constant stream of people from UC Berkeley coming
Oh,
around me,
good.
and I was strongly influenced by their ideas of peace and studying Buddhism at the time and the virtue of kind action. And I am certain that they were influenced directly by you, and so my own personal healing is at least only one step away. And so thank you very much.
You are
Just
so
my
welcome,
chance to
John. You know, this is sometimes a thankless job that we have promoting nonviolence in this world. And so it's very reassuring to hear that the ripples have gone out there somewhere and done some good.
absolutely. They must, yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. And this quality, I don't know if you ever looked at the Book of Changes, the Yijing.
Yijing, yeah,
The,
I have
yeah.
some familiarity with that. Yeah.
And if you look at, I believe it's 46, 43, that it's the best way to combat the bad is to make energetic progress in the good,
Hmm.
the cycle of healing. And yet this idea that we can take the time to train ourselves to understand the lay of the land, the way that to be effective,
Yeah.
and how to heal ourselves beforehand so that we're not damaging ourselves in the process, so it can become a lasting journey. I don't want to say struggle, more of a journey.
Learning is better. Yeah, let me say a couple of things in that connection, John. One is Buckminster Fuller said exactly the same thing, that the way to overcome something negative is not to fight it head on, but to create something much better, which will make it irrelevant, make it obsolete, he actually said. Now, it won't dry up and blow away because a lot of people will still be clinging to it because it's the only thing they know. But the fact that you have prepared an alternative for them makes it much easier to dispense with the now unnecessary function that was provided negatively. So that hence Gandhi's emphasis on constructive program. What he wanted to do, get the British out of India and in effect put an end to colonialism, was not possible in terms of direct confrontation. If they had just directly, gone against the British, that the British would have known what to do with them. Before that, they built up their strength, which is a very valuable lesson for us right now. Incredible networking and replacing what they were depending on the British for by their own efforts. That's where, like the shirt that you're wearing is very likely khadi, you know, homespun cotton.
It could
Yeah.
be.
And
That's
at
right.
first, it seemed like it was completely non-threatening to the regime, but the Indians were not in a position to say, we won't buy your cotton, we won't buy your cotton goods if they had none of their own. So they were dependent, and the British were very clever at creating these dependencies. So what Gandhi did was, wherever possible, liberate Indians first and foremost from those dependencies, and then put them in a stronger position where they could say, okay, we don't need you anymore.
Mhm. That's right. And because there's that safety net, then it makes it a little bit easier for the people in the middle,
Yeah.
which is most people, to shift over to the better
Yeah.
option.
Yeah.
No, that's right. I don't need your salt.
Yeah.
It's right over there.
And then, the next step is to get them to see that they have that option available.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So in this process, these step by step, I appreciate that you're replacing the term bullet point. I'd like to offer the term acupoint
Oh,
as a series
okay.
as an
Okay.
acupuncturist.
We'll take
Um,
it.
so in our series of acupoints and steps that we're following as we're creating this surging movement toward peace and healing, where are we in that part, this movement, since we've had to apparently fall back a little bit
Yeah, we've
during
had
this
to fall
process?
back for sure. Well, I think that there are many resources we should be aware of and start thinking about how to mobilize them, how to coalesce them. And one of them is this pool of people who have gone out into conflict situations, either domestically or internationally, or in fact, locally, domestically, or internationally. Locally, nationally, and internationally. Those are three categories that another group called Metta Peace Teams, it's Metta with one T, that, that, yeah. So what I was getting at is that we wouldn't have to start from scratch identifying people who are somewhat trained and somewhat educated and dedicated and willing to go into action if you show them a plausible plan. So I think we need to do a lot of thinking about where are the vulnerabilities that we can work on when we're strong enough. And we want to do this in a way that doesn't create a horrendous backlash.
That's
That's
right.
important.
And that's actually a specific question that I have for you from some of the local activists up here in northern
Yeah,
Washington, where I live. And when we get together with other activists or people just doing local peace work or even food drives or
yeah,
helping clean litter, even on a Zoom call, it is surprising how many people are working hard to remain anonymous because they're very nervous, as you mentioned, of being
yeah,
targeted by the powers
yeah,
that be. Even peacekeepers are being targeted, which is such a wild thing to
yeah.
say. But how do you recommend staying safe if that targeting becomes more pointed, more aggressive?
Boy, that's a that's a really difficult question. Roadmap.
Conflict escalation curve.
Oh yeah, uh, I'm being reminded that on our website we have a model called conflict escalation curve, and it's important for us to understand where we are on the escalation, the intensity, the dehumanization that's happening. Hold on one second again.
And I'm also reminded of Mohsen Madawi coming out saying, I'm not afraid.
Yes, that's right. This one arrest that happened recently with a Palestinian who was detained and had a chance to make a statement. He said, I'm not afraid of you. That's very powerful because it is through fear that these oppressions are happening. And we have another model that you may have seen on our website called the roadmap, and it's built on three concentric circles. The inner circle is personal preparation. Spiritual practice is a part of it. Learning is a part of it. Shutting off the mass media is an important part of it. And the next circle is constructive program, where you can build things to strengthen yourself and create community among your fellows. It's very, very important. And then build up enough strength to where you can pick a target and say, we can't accept this. And at that point, there's a model that you'll see in our film called the two hands of nonviolence, where you say with one hand, I will not put up with your injustice. But on the other hand, I'm open to you as a human being. And that's what makes nonviolence different from other forms of struggle. In other forms of struggle, it's like one hand. I'm against you and what you're doing.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And instantly you're creating that you're strengthening that sense of identity
Yeah.
that they have of being in
Yeah.
opposition to you instead of recognizing your
That's
shared humanity and the role that you
yeah.
both share together.
And that is basically what a nonviolent actor does when things go right, when you're intervening at the right time in the right place. What you do is you remind your opponent, you make your opponent aware of his or her connection with you. And I've just been listening to readings of Gandhi's famous book, Satyagraha in South Africa. And it is a classic study for, among other things, exactly that capacity to be able to awaken the opponent. He has a famous quote in there from a secretary of the opposition's government who says, you don't want to hurt us, so you've reduced us to utter helplessness. He said, if you would take to violence, we would know what to do with you.
Gosh. Yeah, so inspirational. And yeah, even just the terminology, when we can reclassify it as to take it out of combat language and rather to shift it to even just, I tend to, everything in my mind turns into a medical language. We're trying to heal an illness that's continually spreading,
Yeah.
when when you fight back with somebody with a sword, you end up sharpening their weapons of the weapon of anger and violence and resistance and othering. And
Well,
if we can offer, become something different.
in an earlier book, I talked about the different lenses. And from the conflict lens, you go to the medical lens and you look upon violence as a kind of illness. And then thirdly, you can look upon violence as a kind of ignorance. And I think both of them are correct. But it's really helpful to have those lenses because we know what to do with ignorance. You educate people through your speech, your words, your actions, everything.
So we continue the process of reaching out and building those connections. We build up a team of people. We find, I don't want to use the word target, we find a space that we want to emphasize healing. We put the medicine where it's needed. and we cultivate our ability to be healthy during
Yeah.
that process.
In that middle center section of the roadmap, we recommend 5 things that an individual can do without waiting for the movement or organizations to come along, but not refraining from that, but preparing yourself. And the idea is, however little you have achieved in an inner circle will limit your effectiveness at the next wider circle. So the training that you undertake, with others or not, in that center part is really important. And it doesn't mean you have to get completely illumined before you go into action, but this component should never be omitted. So the first thing we say is shut off the TV, or put down your cell phone. Don't watch the mass media. It is a powerful diseducational tool. And that's not just me saying that. There's been studies on this for decades. But people stopped studying it because nobody was paying attention. But no one was able to disprove it. So then, okay, you're not watching mass media anymore. You have some time on your hands. Use that time to learn about nonviolence. Through websites, watch our film, thirdharmony.org, and so forth. Then thirdly, and maybe this is not third in chronological order, maybe it's going on from the get-go. It's up to you. But it's very helpful and important for us to have some kind of spiritual practice, because when this thing gets rolling, we're going to be challenged at a very deep level. And then fourth, look around and analyze. What's number 4?
Personal.
Yeah, thank you. As you can tell, John, I'm completely helpless without Steph.
We appreciate her so much. The wizard behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's like the Wizard of Oz. Yeah, the fourth thing is in our personal life to interact more personally with people and not at a distance. I like to tell this little story. I was coming to a toll booth with a friend of mine. He was driving, and he gave the toll person the money, and then he said, "Well, how are you feeling today? Is this the beginning of your stint, or are you getting close to the end?" And I'm getting so impatient, thinking loudly to myself, "Bill, for heaven's sake, cut it out. Let's get on our way here." But then I realized that he was doing exactly the right thing. Instead of a superficial commercial transaction, he made human contact with that person. And that would change the fabric of our culture. It'd be extremely important. And then fifthly, and finally, all this stuff strengthening you and preparing you, look around for an area in which your strengths and weaknesses match the need and give you the ability to make your best contribution. Yeah.
I love that.
You're not alone. Marshall Rosenberg also liked it very much.
And his course also was very helpful to me. And gosh, yeah. Nonviolent communication for the
Right.
people who are
Not,
listening.
not to be confused with nonviolence purely simply.
That's right. That's right. Just a method of adjusting the paradigm
Yeah.
subtly as you're talking. Saved some of my relationships when I was younger. And I do have a specific question for both you and for Stephanie. The people who tend to watch this channel, it's emphasizing internal practice, meditation methods, Qigong practice, this kind of thing. And I'm curious about, for you, the internal spiritual cultivations that have helped you the most, or the people around you.
Well, I'm a meditator for about half a century now, and I have a pretty long, uh, pretty time consuming or time nourishing meditation practice where I memorize an inspirational passage of some kind. Yeah, like for example, it might be the prayer of St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, so forth. And I go through it much more slowly than I just did. And and I say when, not if, when there's a distraction and the mind is something else, I don't fight with the mind. I simply refocus on the words of the passage. And so that's the meditation itself. And then I also have a mantra, the way Mahatma Gandhi did. In fact, just a side note here, John, I was mostly very happy with Attenborough's film, Gandhi, but one thing that I strongly objected to is that when the assassination happens and Gandhi falls, he says, "Oh God." Well, like he's saying, "What now? What?" But that's not what happened. He said, "Rama, Rama, Rama," which
Ah,
is his mantra,
yeah.
and which could even be considered a kind of blessing
Yeah.
on the person who had just assassinated him.
Mm.
So that
Very good.
Attenborough, Attenborough was very scrupulously avoiding Gandhi's religion,
Mm.
which of course was the core of his being. So he sort of missed the essence. But be that as it may, yeah, I have a mantra also that I just use whenever I can think of it. Uh, and then, everything else kind of normally follows from that. And you don't want to lead a very riotous, self-indulgent, violent life.
Doesn't dovetail well with the.
Yeah, it jars a little bit. It doesn't stick. So yeah, so that is my practice, and it has helped me tremendously, and it helps me these days with disappointment, with my inability to make a big impact on the world, but my realistic assessment that this is a very, very dark period. And I also completely believe, at least as an intellectual belief, that we don't just live once. And what I have been able to accomplish, whatever I'm able to accomplish in this life, will be my starting point in the next one. So that puts everything in perspective and allows me to see the really, really deplorable things that are going on without having causing me depression. Knock wood, so far.
Sure. Right. Right. Well, and that goes back to where I started when saying that oftentimes when people who are in the thick of it, they are constantly confronted with what they're working on, in the way that an ER doctor is constantly covered in blood. And that can
Yeah.
be really difficult. But for what it's worth, from somebody standing on the outside from that a little bit, um, I can tell you for certain that I personally have witnessed your impact in the world in my own
Oh,
life.
oh,
And
thank you. Not to
and
mention that my grandson is an ER doctor. So,
wonderful. See, all the same, different kinds of medicine, and we do what we can to
yeah,
uplift and help the world
yeah,
become a slightly better place. Whether, like you said, we're checking somebody out, we're somebody the person who's moving the groceries across the line, and they
yeah,
they pause and make a connection.
yeah, yeah.
That changes the
It
world.
does. A friend of mine who is a really, really famous peace activist, David Hartso, he passed away a couple of weeks ago. And he told me this story about his mother, that she was in a supermarket at the checkout counter and somebody tapped her on the shoulder. She turned around and saw a man whom she did not recognize. And he said, "Pardon me, but did you used to protest at the Hanford nuclear lab 20 years ago. And she, it made her a little bit nervous, but she said, yes. And he said, I was working at that plant and we were told specifically not to look at you when we came through the gate. But one day he said, I looked at you and you smiled at me and I quit my job.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
You
Yeah.
cannot
And you
know.
can't know
No.
the kind of impact that you're having.
I
Yeah.
recently posted a story about back in 1953, a very severe famine was going on in China, and we sent little grain bags to the president, with a quote from Isaiah that said, "If thine enemy hunger, feed him." The idea being, we had this incredible surplus of food; they're starving. Duh. Send them some of our surplus. It would have changed them from enemies, implacable enemies, into friends of some kind. And yeah, so I sent in my grain bag. I was, I don't know, 18 or something like that, and waited for the response. I heard nothing, and could have concluded that it was a waste of time. 20 years on, out comes the Freedom of Information Act. And among many other things, there's a conversation which we learn about. Eisenhower was in a meeting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They wanted to bomb China.
Hmm.
This was during the Korean War.
Oh.
You know what that would have caused.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Well, Eisenhower, being a real military person, he knew what they were talking about, and he was desperate to find a way to say no to these guys. And he remembered that these bags had come in. So he sent out one of his aides to find out how many came in. And he came in and he said, Mr. President, there were 35,000 of them. And Eisenhower said, gentlemen, 35,000 Americans are asking me to feed the Chinese. This is not the time to start bombing them.
Wow. Right.
So I had no idea.
That's right.
20 years. And then to add a little extra human interest to this story, we have a dear friend and a board member. I'm sure she's not a board member, but part of one of our team right now is a young woman named Cassie,
Hmm.
who lives up near you in Washington State.
She lives in
Oh, she's in Portland. Oh, it's all the same from
Closer,
a
halfway
California.
between.
If you're thinking that if you're an Angelino, Portland, it's
It's all far north.
Anyway, she said she was very moved when she heard me tell this story and said, my grandfather and two of his daughters died in that famine, and my my mother escaped to a safe place, and she ended up in Hong Kong and gave birth to Cassie. So that made it suddenly this story, which already had taken on a certain kind of political significance for me, that became very personal.
Wow. Gosh. And those are just the ripples that you get to hear about.
Exactly. Yeah, the ones that hit the wall and bounce back in a
That's
certain
right.
way.
That's right.
So,
Yeah. And not including those that transformed the people who are also creating their own ripples and waves and combining.
yeah, exactly. And that we have this concept at Metta called work versus work, quote unquote, where work means, we sent those bags in and it didn't work.
Capital W,
Work,
little W. That's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But work without quotes means because we did something of a positive, nonviolent nature, it will have its impact on on the infrastructure of human life. whether we see it or not. And so we ought to have, on the one hand, a lot of confidence, and on the other hand, a lot of discernment to always see what is the positive, constructive action that I can undertake here. Yeah.
Gosh, I love that. And so important. And maybe one positive constructive action the people that are watching this can take is to recognize that your own teachers and the people that have inspired you over the years, they would love to hear from you. If you want to reach out to them and let them know the change they've made in your life. I've done that
Uh-huh.
with some of my own
Yeah.
teachers from the past. You know, the people you think, oh, yeah, what happened to
Yeah.
that music teacher or that literature professor? And you write to them, and they had no
Yeah.
idea that they changed your entire life. And so I'm certain that there's people out there watching this like, oh, yeah, Professor Michael.
Oh, we would love to hear from them. Yeah.
Oh, I hope they do. Yeah, that's their homework. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense to take the time to even just do some small
Yeah.
local positive action because that those ripples don't stop. They spread.
Yeah. I would say, John, that one way that people can easily help us is to go to the website, look at the film, and then, decide what they want to do from there.
I love that. Ah, and and since I'm such a beginner in this process, I know that I don't know the right questions to ask. So what would you recommend that I ask you?
Gosh,
What am I
what a
missing?
challenge. Well, you might ask me what we're doing these days and how we're planning to go
Oh,
forward.
sure.
And Stephanie has prepared 4 pages with what the Metta Center is doing.
Just say we have training.
Yeah,
If they take a training, that's the best way to start.
Yeah.
Go to mettacenter.org/trainings.
Yeah. The secret is mettacenter.org/trainings. Yes, because we are now, and this is new at Metta Center, we're now doing uh, trainings and help. This time has to be one of pretty intense preparation. I think we were caught off guard, and I think one of the things we must decide is to absolutely not let that happen again. And as I say, let's aim for the highest, not just kicking over the pendulum so it swings back and eventually returns, but let's get something done that absolutely changes uh, the floor, so to speak, or
Yeah, building a foundation.
yeah, the foundation, changes the foundation, puts our country in a new economy, our habits of human interpersonal relationship on a much less, well, let me change that, a much more civil basis. For years, we were saying, oh gosh, look at all the incivility, not realizing that, look what we have now
Yeah,
because of that
that's right.
alienation from one another. And that's something that we can all address in our personal life. And as you started off saying a long time ago in this conversation, John, this is nourishing to ourselves.
Mhm.
And that's a clue that we're not moving towards moral injury. We're moving towards a higher state of health.
Yeah, and I would like it if people, when we look at the news and we're watching the society around us
Yeah,
change, we can recognize the symptoms
yeah.
of these illnesses arising.
It's a question of connecting the dots. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Not at all, please.
it's connecting the dots. So many studies showed that watching violence on television makes us more violent. but nobody had a way of stopping it. And that's why we strongly recommend at least stop it for yourself. Don't let it affect you anymore. And another thing that is helpful, but when you realize this, is to have some compassion. How can people be so nasty and so violent? Well, this is what's been put into their heads morning, noon, and night for decades. I'm of the first generation that had television in the home, and it had a measurable negative impact
Wow.
on human life. Yeah.
Wow. That's quite a statement.
Yep. But people were not prepared or trained or not oriented to see connecting those dots. And one of the reasons is, and there are also ways of explaining why this has taken hold, but it's called materialism. If you think of a human being, we are obviously body, mind, and spirit. And if you're being told explicitly or implicitly by the commercial media, your body, 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 you should do everything to have pleasant sensations and be for yourself always, be selfish and alienated. Well, what we're seeing now is the result of that. So there's no point in getting angry unless you know how to convert anger into compassion, of course. That's very useful.
It is, yeah.
But not blaming people and saying, I can't understand how you could be acting in such a stupid way, quite frankly. But no, we can understand it. This is the culture that they've been exposed to for decades. This is the reason.
These are the waters that we swim in, so we don't notice it
Yeah,
anymore.
that's right. The fish does not know that it's swimming in water.
That's right. I never noticed it until I lived for a number of years outside. I ran a little free clinic in the mountains in Costa Rica
Oh,
for almost
wow,
5 years.
nice. Okay.
And I came back here to live at the monastery and train. And the the shift was so
Oh,
dramatic,
wow.
coming recognizing this layer of tension and
Yeah,
aggression just culturally that we just live here in. And I can only speak, of course, for this little society that I
yeah,
recognize. It's not the same around the world, but there are levels of that you can directly, palpably
yeah.
experience.
There's a stunning film, and I'm not sure it's how available it is anymore. It's a long black and white film called Century of the Self.
Oh, I've seen it. Yeah,
Oh, good. Isn't it wonderful?
wonderful.
I mean, scary, but wonderful.
Yeah, do you want to mention what it is about for the people?
Yeah, it is precisely about the impact of commercial advertising on human relationships and human life. For example, at the beginning of the film, oh, and by the way, very close connection with fascism and fascist propaganda. They're operating on exactly the same wavelength as a lot of commercial advertising does.
Right, that's right. They hook into that part of our nature and
Yeah. So in the very beginning of the film, they have this, it's very instructive contrast. It's an early ad for a Ford automobile. And what you see is a person standing next to a car and saying, okay, this is such and such a car. It does this, it doesn't do that. Then, I don't know, 10, 15 years later, an advertisement for a car. A husband and wife go into a showroom, and there's this very sleek car. The wife slides in behind the steering wheel, has practically, I would, an experience which, and winks at her husband. And so what they have explicitly done is hooked up some of our baser impulses to a commercial behavior. And the tragedy, all they're getting out of it is some money. And what they're doing in order to get that money is tremendous human damage.
That's
So
true.
we shouldn't.
And for people watching, I'll link as well. You can watch that documentary for free.
Oh, good,
So I'll link.
good. Glad to hear it. I think it's time for me to watch it again. I think I'm strong enough.
It's intense. That lingering legacy
Yeah.
of starting to pay attention to how the human psyche works, and we go, oh, we can manipulate this.
Yes, we can be manipulated, and knowledge that you're being manipulated is the first step in getting you free. If you don't know you're being manipulated, you'll never resist.
That's right. Yeah. And the inoculation
Yeah.
of that knowledge helps you resist. You go, this doesn't feel right. How am my values are here. Suddenly I'm way over
Yeah.
here. When you find yourself wanting people to be, tortured to death or some terrible, like you've passed a line somewhere in there, and maybe you should reevaluate your source of
Yeah.
information.
And maybe you should recognize that you've been pulled off your human base. You've been caused. You are no longer in touch with who you are.
Yeah,
And in fact, if you look at these studies on moral injury, it's like a refrain that these poor guys come back with that, I lost my soul in Iraq. I'm no longer the person that I want to be. Uh,
that's
so,
right. I've treated a number of those people for various kinds of trauma
yeah,
over the years.
yeah.
It's
Uh,
generally the same thing.
yeah. On the other hand, it's important to realize that we have scientists now who are uncovering this, what they call the better angels of our nature, as our basic human nature, and that is very, very helpful. I mean, that I was partly a science major early part of my career, and it was not available to me back then. But now people can read Franz de Waal and Rutger Bregman, and other people, and scientists are beginning to recognize that we have what you and I would call a spiritual core.
That's right. Yeah. And when nourished, that brings out the best of humanity.
Yes,
And we cannot dehumanize another person without dehumanizing ourselves.
that is the critical thing to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you so much. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you, and I'm to have the chance to talk to you.
Thank you, John. I have appreciated it just as much, and I so welcome the opportunity to share everything that we've worked on for so long with.
It's changing the
Yeah,
world a bit at a time, under the surface. And as you know, the things that change the waters that we're swimming in, that change the quiet parts,
yeah,
those are the most powerful. It's not always the most explicit thing.
that's,
And so even the subtle changes you've
yeah.
been allowed are happening, are shifting the space that we're walking in, and you are very much appreciated. You and Stephanie, the hidden Stephanie.
That's yeah. So thank you,
Thank you.
John. Welcome. Enjoy your tea, John, and thank you for the great work that you're doing.